Hello and welcome to the Magic Mirror Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Khan, the Trinket Mage. And with me is my co-host, 33 Elk.
Hello.
How are you doing, Elk?
I'm fine.
Okay, that's good.
Everything's okay.
Yeah. And my other co-host, Salubrious Snail.
Hello.
How are you doing, Snail?
I'm doing pretty okay. Throat's a little sore today, but I'm hanging in there.
Nice, nice. Today we have a fun podcast topic. I guess we always have fun podcast topics, I think. But we're going to talk about overplayed cards in Commander. And then, as always, we'll get to your questions later on. But first, this podcast is sponsored by Card Castle, the easy way to sort your collection digitally. Click our link in the description below to get 1 free month of premium. Thanks to Card Castle for sponsoring the podcast. So let's just jump right into it. We're talking about overplayed cards in EDH. So cards that we think see more play than they should. Doesn't mean that the card is bad. I mean, maybe we'll say if a card is bad. It doesn't necessarily mean that a card is bad, but maybe that more people are using it over other better options. Now, to determine this, we're using EDH Rec's usage. They have a thing on the website where they calculate the percent of decks a card shows up that it possibly could. So, for example, Counterspell, it has at 43%, which means 43% of decks on EDH Rec that have a blue in the color identity are playing Counterspell. So that's kind of how their numbers work. We're putting staples at roughly 10 to 15% or higher usage, yes?
About
Ish.
there. There's a few lower ones.
I got some
yeah,
mates,
but
you know.
generally.
It is.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. It'll be fine. We're vibing.
We're playing a little fast and loose with the rules here. But all of these cards are relatively popular.
I was telling Elk that one of the ones I'm going to be talking about is like a 60-something% play rate one, so I had to include some lower ones in there to balance it out.
Do you want to start with that one? Because I think it's pretty
No. Well, me and Elk are sharing that one, so I'll let Elk go into it first.
Yeah. So we will get to that one, but I did want to kind of forerun the one I wanted to talk about, which is
Yeah.
It's two cards that are the same effect but different costs. It's a mono white and a mono blue card, one called Ghostly Prison, one called Propaganda. Both of these cards cost 2 in their respective color, and they say creatures cannot attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature that is attacking you. I generally do not like these cards. It's very rare that I find them to actually do stuff for me. And when my opponent has them, it stops maybe 1 or 2 attacks over the course of the game. I really strongly dislike these cards, and I have my reasons for them, but I want to hear maybe like a defense first, because I know one of you really likes them at least.
Yeah, I think you're so wrong. I think Propaganda in Ghostly Prison, I used to be like you. I used to think, you need to, combo them with other Pillar Fort effects and blah, blah, blah. No. I've totally flipped. I think you can throw these cards in any random commander deck and take free wins off of it. Absolutely just free wins. It's crazy. I'll play like my Heliod deck, which is very slow, very control-y. And I'll play a Ghostly Prison, and then for the next 4, 5, 6 turns, I just don't get attacked for free. And I just sit there and I draw cards and I play all my like ramp pieces, and I just don't have to think about anything. And it just wins the game by itself on a 3-mana enchantment. And the best part is, so many players I run into do not realize that this card is single-handedly winning me the game. So then the next time when I play again, I just win again because I play Ghostly Prison again. It's just a free win against a lot of players.
Okay, I can definitely see like the argument that maybe some tables it's better at, but for me, this is the tale of Ghostly Prison and Propaganda. You are playing against someone like an Elves player, someone who goes wide. This is the best case scenario for this card. It stops almost any attack from coming your way. It's just huge board. You cannot pay to attack with all of them, so you swing in with a couple of dorks. The issue is this best case scenario for the card does not work against most decks that like to go wide. Green and white, what are they known for destroying the most? Artifacts and enchantments. All they need to do is build their board, Crater Hoof, artifact destruction, enchantment destruction, like etc. up the wazoo in those colors, and then they alpha strike you. Like, we even have a term for that. Yeah, alpha striking. Like, you don't need to swing with the board for chip damage when you have that top end, which is how most of those decks end up winning. The other thing is that it doesn't stop really aggressive decks that attack with only one creature at a time. So, for instance, a just like any old like rune deck will just run right over your Ghostly Prison if the person gives any amount of thought to it, right? They randomly roll you, they pay the 2, they swing in, right? Or just like a better Voltron Commander in general. The last thing is Blood Artist, Drain Effects, Impact Tremors, these over the top, like you don't even need to move to combat anymore in Commander. Like, just drain out your opponents. Like, this is a lot of decks too. It feels like there's too much it doesn't stop. And I would rather have like a moat.
Before I hear Snail's opinion and before I tell you why you're wrong, I just wanted to point out both of these are in 12% of possible decks. What do you think, Snail?
I take the centrist position. I don't like these in most of my decks. However, I think there are some decks, particularly like maybe a slower combo deck, maybe like a mill deck, maybe like a control deck where it's very clear you're going to be doing big things in the late game. There are some decks that will just be typically taking the chip damage throughout the game, where people will go, that deck is going to be a problem at some point. I don't know, what my specific plan for them is. Have a creature. If you can drop one of these things early, I think you're in good shape. However, I think, Elk is also right. There are a lot of things that get around these. There are a lot of times you're going to play one of these. It's just going to be paying 3 mana for a do-nothing card. That could have been a synergy piece. That could have been anything else to bolster your game plan. And I think for your average, like, kind of mid-rangey synergy pile deck, they might be better served to play one of those cards. But if you're one of those kind of specific decks where you're generally going to be attracting a lot of table ire and you might not have a ton of blockers or other forms of deterrence, I think it works.
Yeah, for context, I don't play creatures, so like chip damage is a big problem for me. But also you can't use this. So Elk is right that yes, you're gonna get Alpha Strike. If they have a Voltron deck, they'll just pay 2 mana, blah blah blah, all that stuff. You cannot use this in lieu of actual removal, right? Do not count this as a removal piece. This is a life gain card. That's how you got to think about it. It's a life gain card and a burn spell. That's how you think about it, right? Every single time someone says, I'm not going to attack you, I'm going to attack so-and-so instead, you gained 4 life and dealt 4 damage to them.
I think life gain is a form of removal. That's going to sound bizarre, but I think, there are cards like destroy target non-artifact creature, destroy target non-black creature, destroy target artifact, things like that. Removal that specifies what it targets. Something like propaganda, deal with token decks, deal with chip damage. You're targeting something specific. That doesn't make it not removal. It just means that you need to consider the use cases, and you should be doing that with all your removal. You should go, okay, what decks is this going to deal with? What situations is this not going to deal with? How am I going to deal with the situations that it's not going to deal with? How does my deck do against those situations in general? That sort of thing. Sorry, this is kind of an interruption. You can go back to what you were saying, but I think it's a little more complicated than it is or it isn't removal.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I don't want you to be like, yeah, I'm going to cut 2 board wipes to play Propaganda Ghostly Prison. Because it doesn't, like, serve the same function.
Sure, yeah. There are some cases where it will not perform the same function. Some cases it might, but some cases it definitely won't.
For me, in particular, I mentioned Moat. Like, Magus the Moat, cheaper option, by the way, and pretty good as well. For me, what I would much rather see people running, I think you run it in Heliod too anyway, it's just like Crackdown. That card's great.
Yeah.
And then also Fogs. And I know you hate Fogs, but I love Fogs, especially because it does stop the instance of the Voltron player killing you through a Ghostly Prison. Like, instead of a Ghostly Prison, that kill would be instead of Fog. And then also Fog stop and Alpha Strike, which is also really important.
My one, and for anybody who's seen my channel, this probably doesn't come as too much of a surprise, but I like to call them escalation enchantments. So cards that if you're doing a thing, you do more of that thing. And I think the best ones we could talk about are like token doublers like Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, and whatever the white one is called, Anointed Procession.
Someone stop this man. He can't stop coining terms.
I can't. No, nobody will stop me. So these cards can be very good in some situations. If you already have, a source of creating tokens, and this goes for any of these effects. If you already have a source of creating tokens, an Anointed Procession is pretty good. If you already have a source of creating, counter somethings, a Hardened Scales is pretty good. I think particularly when you have something in the command zone that does something that you can amplify. I think that can be quite good as long as it's not like a 7-drop that's going to get removed immediately. So if you have easy access to this effect, I think it's quite good. These can be quite strong, and I think a lot of people see that and just assume that these cards are just generically strong. So I've seen these cards in decks with pretty small token packages, like maybe like 10 cards, 12 cards, 15 cards, with the commander not involved with tokens. And I just can't co-sign on that. I think a lot of times when you do that sort of thing, you're going to be finding yourself with an Anointed Procession, and then maybe you play one token card, but then it like hasn't even paid for itself at that point, right? Like, you've paid 4 mana, maybe you doubled like a 3 mana token spell, but then at that point, you haven't even gotten your full value for the card yet. So you really need this plus like at least 1 or 2 other things. So I think these tend to get overplayed for that reason. People put them in decks where there's just not enough of that thing going on, and it can really kind of be a dead weight.
Even in dedicated token decks, I often tell people to cut O'Hare Tack, just because of the way their curve looks. O'Hare Tack is the 6 mana Ixalan god. That triples your token generation. Now, notably, though, it only triples your token creature generation, so it doesn't work with treasure tokens. So Pitiless Plunderer, stuff like this, clues, you do not get double of those. You only get double creature tokens. And also the card's just 6 mana, which is really expensive, and you need to be ready to like have the tokens be made right away. Because, for instance, you can't have a card that has an activated ability that makes tokens that you want to double, and also a 6-drop in the same turn that you have to untap with to get the value out of that activated ability. Even something like Oketra, I wouldn't run O'Hare Tack in, because O'Hare Tack takes up 6 of that mana that you need to play your White Mane Lion repeatedly. White Mane Lion, the tech with Oketra, is that you replay it repeatedly to get the 4/4s. So you save all your mana until the end step before your turn, and then you play White Mane Lion, bouncing it back to your hand each time, and then you get that many 4/4s off God Eternal Ketra, which says whenever you cast a creature spell, you make a 4/4. O'Hare Tack does not fit into that game plan of hold up the mana that I'm talking about, whereas like an Anointed Procession or a Mondrak, Glory Dominus, just token doublers do. So even in this department of token doublers, there's some where I like them in some decks, and there's some where like I consider them like stone cold unplayable in most decks, like O'Hare Tack. You need like Adeline before I'm interested in O'Hare Tack.
Anointed Procession and Doubling Season are both in about 9% of possible decks. And both those cards legit suck. Like, they're awful. I don't think I've ever lost a game of Magic the Gathering because of either of those cards. It's just like, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything. It's 5 mana do nothing. Like, people are like, oh, I can double my Planeswalkers or whatever. Like, that's just a 12 mana bad combo.
I do want to offer a little pushback to that. I think you do need to be there is some truth to it, where like you do need to be evaluating whether or not you could be winning the games that you win without these cards. However, I know 100% that there's decks that do win the game because these cards are in play. I mentioned Adeline earlier. Adeline is a great use case for token doublers. And the reason is that Adeline is cheap. Adeline is protected. She doesn't have to attack herself to get her trigger. And Adeline makes the tokens for free. So what you can do is turn 3 Adeline, which says whenever you attack with a creature, you get to make a 1/1 tapped and attacking creature for each opponent. And then with Anointed Procession on curve, the turn 4 after the turn 3 Adeline, you're now making 6 attackers. Next turn, if that isn't answered, like Divine Visitation, you're getting 6 angels into play because it replaces all of your creature token generation with angels. Like, I've seen great games off of these cards just because like the token doubling came off of a creature that generates a load of tokens for free each turn versus like an ETB effect versus a activated ability versus an on cast trigger, right? Like if you have to spend extra mana after you play the Anointed Procession, it gets a little bit more dicey. If you have the Anointed Procession and you're just passively generating tokens, I'm way more invested in what you're doing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like a lot of people play these cards and they see and they go, oh, I turned 10 tokens into 20 tokens. And that's a big number. But like 10 tokens was already a lot, right? Like you're already like, everything has to be going well for you for these cards to be any good at all. In which case, any synergy piece might have been just as much of a win con there. And then a lot of times also people play this, they make the 20 tokens, they eat a board wipe, and then they have this enchantment to play that doesn't actually do anything. And they're like, well, you know, if this was just a protection spell and I protected my 10 tokens, I would probably be in a better situation. I do want to push back on O'Hare Attack. This is the only token, I guess tripler, but token amplifier that I play in my Heliod deck because it doesn't straight up die to removal. You know, like it can get exiled, but you can transform it into a land and then flip it back and stuff. So I find it a lot easier to like play this card and like, oh, if it eats a board wipe, so what? I'll just get it back later. And then like, I actually really like this card. I think it's really good.
I think O'Hare Tack is good in any deck where you'd be fine running a 6 mana Rampant Growth. Because that thing's going to get blown up immediately and turn into a land. If you're happy to eat that, then absolutely run O'Hare Tack.
Then you flip it back, and then if they don't have the board wipe, you go, all right, cool, now I'm going to make like a gajillion dudes.
The thing is that the amount of slowness you're describing is like only possible in your Heliod token control deck. It's not most token decks that want to burn people down with tokens, right?
That's probably fair.
Yeah, I think with all these effects, and particularly with kind of the 4 mana ones, Anointed Procession style things, is always a question of, is the benefit you're getting pushing your board from something where it wasn't, you know, doing what you wanted it to do to something where it is? Because you mentioned like 10 and 20 tokens. That definitely is, you know, maybe for some decks, that is a difference that matters a lot. If you have, you know, creature ETB things, that might matter a lot. Whereas in other decks, maybe an Anthem would have done the same thing. It also depends on what tokens you're summoning. If you're summoning 4/4s and you're summoning 10 versus 20, that could be a very meaningful difference. So you always have to consider kind of what exactly are you gaining by adding this card into things? Or is this amplifying your board? Is this amplifying your token creation in a way that is going to change the outcome of those tokens that you create? Is that, you know, is the 10 versus 20 or the 5 versus 10 or the 7 versus 14, is that going to be a meaningful difference? Is that going to make the difference in this game? I think that's definitely what people need to be thinking about.
Okay, first card I want to talk about. This shows up in 21% of possible decks, which is quite a bit. Brainstorm. And this is one of the cards that whenever somebody shows me their deck, like, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? Blah, 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 right? This is one of the first things. So Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain, all of these cantrips are one of the first things I recommend players cut. If I go to a random commander, I go to Arkalos, the Sultai turtle guy, search for Brainstorm, there's like 386 decks playing it, which isn't a lot. But what I'm saying is you can go to any blue commander and you'll find like hundreds of decks playing Brainstorm. Even when it's not a Spellslinger commander, it has nothing to do with it. And I never understood why. Brainstorm and cantrips in general are really, really good in Spellslinger decks. Decks where you want to cast many spells in a turn, right? You have things that trigger off of instants and sorceries, so you want to cast 5 instants and sorceries in one go. In a random blue deck, especially without fetches, these cards are not particularly good. Like, they're fluff that digs for something. But if you're not a combo deck, digging for that is probably worse than real card advantage. Or, a lot of times they help smooth out your draws for finding lands, but you should probably just be playing more lands instead of a ponder and hoping to hit a land.
So, I think we need to draw a distinction between these different effects, because these are very different to me. I think Brainstorm, obviously, without fetches, it is a pretty mediocre card. I think other things like Opt, Consider, you are right that they are kind of Spellslinger fodder. It's just not that effective a thing without Spellslinger. Preordain, a little bit better. Ponder, I think, is pretty much the gold standard, and I don't think you're going to feel bad about running that in most decks. That's just pretty good. And I think in EDH, in the context of EDH, you're going to have a lot of times where a blue deck has, maybe turn one, they don't have anything to play. You play a Ponder, your game state is probably smoothed a bit on average. Turn two, maybe you played a Talisman or an Arcane Signet, and you have an extra mana to spend. You spend it on a Ponder, you're probably immediately feeling better about the state of the game. So I think Ponder, and to a slightly lesser extent Preordain, are just really good cards, and I think people are probably right to play them. Now,
Is that worth a real card slot?
I mean, does it count as a slot? Like, it's a cantrip. You spend an extra mana you had somewhere. Maybe in some decks you don't have that extra mana, in which case that's worth reconsidering. But if it's like your extra mana on turn one or turn two, if it's not like a super, super fast streamlined deck, yeah, you're probably going to have extra mana, and it replaces itself, and it smooths out your game plan. And you'll probably get land screwed less often if you have it in your hand.
I just want to make it clear for everyone that we are not talking about like miracle decks, and we're not talking about like top deck manipulation decks. I'm thinking of like the one Esper Sphinx that, like, if she attacks, she reveals the top card, and if it's odd, you get to cast it for free, right?
Yeah, obviously.
Brainstorm is like the best card in these decks.
If you're playing Scry Tribal, then the cantrips that Scry are really good. Like, yeah, obviously, if you put it in exactly like the best possible deck, it's worth it. But what I'm talking about is like a lot of random decks just.
I definitely think if you're raw dogging a Brainstorm in a deck, you've gone mad. I do not think that just like a raw dog Brainstorm is good. I'm right with you there. I think I need to have 10 shuffle effects before I'm like actually earnestly considering like a Brainstorm in a deck, and that's probably too low even. Like, I want land cyclers, I want tutors, I want the whole slew of stuff before I'm considering Brainstorm as a good card.
And Ponder also, without fetches, gets way worse. Like, pondering to draw the top card and shuffling away the other two is like a real, like, powerful thing.
I don't know. I usually feel pretty fine having the option of order them or shuffle away. Like, it gives you the option to shuffle away if you don't like the cards. And, like, obviously, optimally...
But sometimes you want one, but not the other two.
Obviously, yeah, there will be the situations where optimally you'd prefer that, but I think the card gives you enough for one mana in my mind.
I don't know. I just feel like whenever I see it, and I'm like, all right, you're in blue-black, you should have just played a Baleful Strix instead. It also cantrips, you can play it on an early turn, it also like gets you one card deeper, but it has like another effect. It's now a thing that has flying and death touch. It's really annoying to get around.
It's 100% more mana though.
But it's like so much more impactful on turns 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
I want to be a Ponder hater, but I just can't. It always feels good when I have one.
I've played a lot of cantrips in CDH over the years, and like, I don't know, without the fetches, Ponder feels so... It really does feel worse when you have something good on top of the other two.
I think we can maybe agree that the fact that Brainstorm is in 21% and Ponder, which is, I would say, a better card in almost all decks, is only in 13%. Maybe that is weird. Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I feel like Brainstorm has a bit more of a pedigree to it.
Yes, for sure.
I know, it's like, oh, it's Brainstorm, it's good in Legacy, but it's like, okay, we're not playing Legacy.
Yeah, the thing is, Ponder is also good in Legacy. People think of Brainstorm.
Brainstorm's older. It's been good in Legacy for decades and decades.
My theory is if you cut your cantrips for either... If you're like, oh, I always need my cantrips to hit my lands, you should probably just play a land. But if you're just like playing these like random cantrips, you maybe should just cut them for card advantage. Something that just draws more cards. And I feel like on average, in the mid game, that's going to help you more.
Yeah. I don't play Ponder super, super heavily. I don't know. I rate cards based on how often I'm sad to have them in hand usually. Like that's typically how I decide on them. And there are definitely draw spells that I am sometimes like a little bit bummed. Like, oh, this doesn't quite serve the purposes I want right now. And yeah, Ponder doesn't fall into that category just quite often enough for me to kind of cast it aside as the thing that should be replaced. But definitely there are some cases where I think a deck would probably be better served to run maybe some other sort of digging or value generating card.
So my next one is it's right next to Swords to Plowshares, and it blows my mind because I consider it like worse. It's Path to Exile. For me, you really need to have a plan going into this card when you put it in your deck. It should not just be, I'm making a white deck, here's Swords, here's Path. I think this card is super overplayed. It's a 2-for-1, right? And it's in a 4-player like format. Like, it's tough to like even really consider running this for me anymore. And it also has the commander problem, where if you path someone's commander, if they make their land drop next turn, they're going to be able to just recast their commander. So it's a bounce spell that taps them out for their next turn, I guess. But still, like, it doesn't actually remove the threat if that threat happened to be a commander, right? So it's tough. I really have not been liking this card as time has gone on. As a budget include, like me comparing it here to Winds of Abandon, a card that cost 100% more at sorcery speed that I put in a lot of decks, is a little bit unfaithful. But like, if you're not on a budget, Winds of Abandon I find is just the better card, like by a mile.
Winds cost?
Winds costs 1 and a white, and it's a sorcery speed card.
Monetarily,
one white.
I mean, it's like a few bucks.
Yeah, but like, yeah, it's like $4. I see. Yeah, so it's $4. But no, I find it often better because you don't have that awful like Path to Exile top deck in the late game. Instead, it's a one-sided Wrath that can push through your board. You know, like it actually has merit in the late game, whereas a Path gets like worse as the game goes on. Sometimes it gets better because, you know, they already have all their lands out, stuff like this. But I mean, the Swords Path Valley is huge. It is insurmountable. It is a country mile between these two cards, and they should not be the first two that you put in a white deck.
Yeah, I've been a Swords and Path hater for a little while now in this card. Both of them are kind of whatever. I'm a big believer in pay more mana to hit more permanent types. Flexibility is king in Casual Commander. You usually don't need the 1 mana interaction to, you know, kill some massive threat on turn 1. Yeah, it is slightly better to hold up, but like, you know, a 2 mana card or a 3 mana card isn't that bad. So like in my Heliod control deck, which we talked about earlier, I don't run these, even though it's mono white control, because I would rather play Generous Gift that hits multiple types, or Struck of Midnight, or whatever, right? In some decks where I really want to be spot removing like problematic creatures and play less board wipes, then maybe I'll play these as spot removal cards. So on my old Mardu list, I used to do that. But yeah, I don't like either of them, to be honest, just because they only hit creatures.
I want to make it clear that I actually do particularly like Swords. That's the thing, is I do generally consider Swords a good enough card to run in Commander, especially in an aggressive sort of deck where you are tapping out mostly for your turns and just like have 1 mana floating. These are the instances where I want to see a Swords to Plowshares rather than a Path to Exile come out of someone. Just because Swords doesn't give them resources to play with. Path does. And that's actually a very significant difference.
Actually, as the resident black player, life total is a resource, I'll have you know.
Yeah, actually, honestly.
Yeah, if they have a Necropotence in play, you'd rather have a Path. But like, this is like a fraction of a percent of worlds.
Yeah, I am broadly very much in agreement with this. I am in agreement with Swords is better than Path. And I also, I very much so dislike single target, creature specific, low cost removal in general. I think there are some decks that want it. So to be clear, I have my Francisco Malcolm high power deck. It wants to win fast. It wants to win on turn 5. And it like has maybe 1 to 2 extra mana that it can kind of weave in a removal spell here or there. So it's running the low cost things, because if you plan to win fast, you don't have to worry about the Jin Gitaxias on turn 6, the all of this stuff on turn 6, 7, 8, 9. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about the Engines creature dropped on turn 5 that's going to start, you know, pumping out value. If you plan to win early and threaten life totals fast, you don't need these later game removal spells. Or you can just, you know, go with this low cost creature removal, kill the thing for the lowest price possible. However, most decks don't fit into that description. And I think a lot of decks would be better served to run all sorts of other things. I think particularly control decks. If you're running a lot of single target removal in a control deck, you're going to fall behind. That's just not getting you enough value per card. You want to be able to kill multiple things. You want to be able to run a removal engine that can kill things over time. You want to run things that fit into with other themes in your deck so that they can kind of cohere and generate more value together. In something like an aggro deck, you want to be slamming creatures early and then playing higher quality removal later. You don't want to be, running the best possible option. You want to be running the things that will let you punch in for the most damage later. If you're running a tempo deck, you want to be running removal engines that you can kind of hit on curve and then try and play around, keep opponents in check. So I think these low cost removal spells do have their place in some decks, the most lean, efficient decks that just want to kill a thing and then win, just delay the opponents for long enough that they can win. I think they do have a place in those decks. And I think maybe even you can afford to run like a couple of these low cost cards just for edge case scenarios. But that means you might be adding Path and then saying, no, I don't need swords. Or I guess the other way around. You might be adding swords and going, no, I don't need Path. I can just stick with the swords and then some higher cost ones. As an example, in my formerly Liesa deck, currently in process of converting to a Brina deck, I do not run either Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile. What I do run both of is Dismantling Wave and Soul Shatter. The first one of these is one that destroys an artifact or enchantment for each opponent and can be cycled for 8 mana to destroy all artifacts and enchantments. It's a 3 mana base cost card, by the way. And then Soul Shatter is one that 3 mana card makes each opponent sacrifice a creature or planeswalker with the highest cost they control. Both of these cards get so much more value than their kind of lower cost counterparts. You deal with a thing for each player. And Soul Shatter has the added benefit you get around Indestructible, you get around Hexproof, all of that. Dismantling Wave has the added benefit that you can, use it as a board wipe later on. So, you're getting so much more for just like 2 mana more. So that is broadly my opinion. I do not like, even something like an Abrade or a Terminate or something like that. I think, you might want to run like one of those. I usually run a Terminate in my decks that run red-black, but you might not want to pack in a whole lot more single target removal past that.
Be careful. Braid is my Drannith Magistrate tax deck slot of choice. I'm not saying like there's Drannith Magistrates everywhere in the world, but I always think about it. Like if there is a Drannith Magistrate tier creature in play, can my deck remove it consistently? That's like the cutoff for most of my decks. For me in terms of single target removal. And I agree. Soul Shatter, I don't think Soul Shatter has ever not hit the creature I wanted it to hit. Soul Shatter is such a good card. Yeah, absolutely.
It's so good.
I would even push so far as to say that Shieldred's Edict is also incredible. I'm a big fan of Shieldred's Edict. The fact that it's just non-token or token creature, you get to pick either or, and if there's a planeswalker that's giving you a headache, you can also get rid of that. Right? Like, I do appreciate these cards quite a bit because they are 3-for-1s in this format.
Yeah, I think it also very much depends on the power level you plan to play at. So in my Room Slide deck, I run almost no single target removal. And that's because I'm playing at power levels where I'm not playing against fast combo. I'm not playing against decks that are trying to lock me down on turn 5. I'm not playing against all of these things that might necessitate faster removal. If you are, absolutely. I think the higher power level you creep to, the more you're going to want these lower cost things. But if you're playing kind of a mid-power deck, it might be the case where if a deck needs that sort of removal, it might be kind of out of the range of what you really should be playing against anyway.
I'm combining two because they're very similar. Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves.
Oh, yeah.
In 28% of decks and 25% of decks, respectively. And it's too many. Okay, so these are not bad Magic the Gathering cards. I do think there's a lot of people who go, yeah, I think my commander is useful for the deck, and then they just jam it in there. which is totally the wrong way to think about these cards. So they can give your commander hexproof, haste, or shroud in haste. I think a lot of decks I see play these and they don't care about the haste part. And if you're doing that, if you don't care about the haste portion, like your commander doesn't have a tap ability, you don't need it to attack immediately, I don't think it's really worth it. And Lightning Greaves especially. The Shroud is also like, I see people play it in like Voltron decks and other random stuff. Shroud means you can't target it. So when you put the Shroud, on your commander, you have to move it to another creature and then it becomes vulnerable again when you equip your other stuff before you move it back. So the protection is kind of awkward in decks like that. But I'll say this, so as an example, if you were playing a blue deck, I think a regular Counterspell is probably better than a Swift of Boots or a Lightning Greaves, if you don't care about the haste. Because what happens is when you play these, and then your opponent goes, okay, here's my board wipe, your commander still dies. Whereas if you just had a Counterspell, you would just counter the board wipe, and then you wouldn't be in this situation. Or the spot removal spell, or whatever else. And you can do the same with other colors and other protection spells.
I generally agree with this. Like you said, any deck where my commander has a tap ability, I feel like Lightning Greaves is one of the first cards I add. So I definitely agree with you in that instance where like the haste is like probably the best part of Lightning Greaves. The Shroud is a nice added bonus if you're not equipping anything else. And yeah, like it's tough, you get board wiped. And we were just talking about how people have been like, especially us anyway, and this is a greater trend I've been seeing. People have been cutting like 1-for-1s. We were just talking about Soul Shatter. We were talking about board wipes, like Winds of Abandon instead of a Path to Exile, right? So it's like Greaves has been getting less good over time. I still think the Greaves is just as good in Kalia and tap ability commanders as it's ever been. But it's definitely fallen off as like, this is the protection card in my deck. I think you should have a plan like any of these other cards that I mentioned before. You should have a plan for Greaves. Oh, I have Muddle the Mixture and I can transmute for it and whatever. I used to run Greaves in Tekkathal, but it turns out the indestructible counter on Tekkathal that it can give itself is just good enough. So, yeah, generally I'm just more in favor of like commanders that already protect themselves if they're a value piece like that, or just building a deck that doesn't particularly care about its commander already. So I guess I'm not the best person to be talking about Greaves, but generally speaking, even the decks I do put Greaves in, it's because I'm using the haste part of it more than the Shroud.
Yeah, I was gonna say, my opinion of these cards has gone way up over the past, I would say, year. Now, granted, I did not have a wildly high opinion of these cards before that, because I wasn't, seeing the utilization of the haste. I was more just seeing like, okay, this is a decent protection spell, and I think with the haste attached, these are quite good cards. However, with the decks that are being put in, I think that probably you're right, Con. Like if you're just running this in like a generic like value pile mid range deck where it's maybe an extra layer of protection for your hack ball or something like that, that's not all that great. That's just it's the equivalent of a counterspell. Board wipes get around it, whereas a counterspell might be better against that. Sacrifice effects get around it. All sorts of things get around it. So obviously it's not great as pure protection. But oh my god, if you can take advantage of the haste, these cards are insane. And the fact that Lightning Greaves is, it's basically an anger in a deck based around tap abilities. Plus a protection spell, which is just bonkers to me. I've been enjoying these a lot lately and definitely trying them out in some places that I hadn't been before.
These are some of the best haste enablers in the game, but they are not some of the best protection spells in the game. And I feel like a lot of people think of them as a protection spell first and haste enabler second.
Yeah. I think this is non-controversial. I think Lightning Greaves is way worse than Commander. Like I would say maybe about like 80% worse in Commander than they were 4 months ago when Nadu was legal.
Oh my god. I just clicked on on EDA Truck. I just clicked on Swift Boots and it's so funny. So top commander Kalia the Vast, that makes sense. Haste commander. Second commander Krenko, tap ability. Next is Ishin. Okay, maybe you want to give haste to your other dudes, and then the fourth one, Hackball, exactly what you said. 52.7% are playing it. Hackball needs turns to get big. It doesn't matter. And then you're in blue too. The bane of this Merfolk go wide deck is board wipes.
Wow, that's
Okay,
Oh my
to be
goodness.
clear, Hackball just does everything. He goes wide, he goes tall, he draws you cards, he does everything.
Exactly. That's why you should play a counterspell to stop their farewell, not the.
that's so funny. I
Boom.
just
Yeah,
grabbed
no,
that random creature
I agree.
out of nowhere. But that's
This one I have 2 cards that are very similar, and they're both black cards. I have Black Market Connections and Phyrexian Arena. I do not like either of these cards at all, and I think in most decks they're better as like a Night's Whisper or a Sign in Blood, or even like a Dire Sight, right? Surveil 2, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. I think it's better as one of those, each of these cards. It's gonna depend a lot. For me, this card is not good, and like these cards are not good until they've drawn you 4 cards back. That's the spot where I'm like, oh yeah. But when does that happen? When you've cast this on turn 1 through 3, either with help of a Dark Ritual or just naturally, which you're not guaranteed to do by any stretch of the imagination. You're not tutoring for them to get played on curve on turn 3.
Maybe not you.
And then on top of this, it's also horrible to top deck. If you're in a top deck war and you could have drawn a Night's Whisper that could have gotten you 2 cards deeper, and instead you draw a Phyrexian Arena, like head in your hands, you're sobbing, right? Like you feel the pain. I think the more of these effects you have in your deck, the worse your deck feels, where you have to untap with it to get value. I think you should have maybe 1 or 2 cards like this max in your deck, and these aren't it.
Oh,
Like,
interesting.
Yeah.
I feel the opposite. When I play cards like Phyrexian Arena, let's say I'm playing a Rakdos deck, I'm playing Phyrexian Arena, I'm playing Outpost Siege, I'm playing the new triple red one, and I just jam every single one of those I can and try to mulligan for it more aggressively so I can play one of these on turn 3. Because when you play it on turn 3, it feels really good. You're just drawing 1 card every single turn, get a lot of advantage out of it. So all my mono red decks play every single one of these enchantments that are Visions of Phyrexia, whatever, all of those things. And I actually like playing a lot of them just to be here's my card draw engine, and I get that out on turn 3 or 4, and I'm kind of good to go for the most of the mid game, you know? I think playing 1 or 2 randomly is kind of awkward.
Man, I thought I was gonna agree with you, Elk, but Dire Sight, ooh, that's a tough replacement.
I would rather run a Dire Sight than
So-
either of these 2 cards, quite honestly.
I agree that it's probably overplayed in the sense that a lot of times people should be trying to focus more on how they can build an engine with their deck's specific synergy package. I don't even think I have this in any of my decks right now because there are other cards that are better for, the specific deck I have them in. I have better cards for drawing cards in both my Liesa deck and the upcoming Brina deck that I'm putting together. I have better options in, any of my other black decks. However, I think these are still pretty good, as cards. And I think you mentioned the top deck situation, but in any sort of game where you're going to be top decking, that is a slow-paced game. That is a game where it is grinding out. It is all about every last bit of resources, typically in my experience. And in that case, the Phyrexian Arena is great. If you can land one of those and then just ride it out for 4, 5, 6 turns while the game is kind of grinding out, maybe some stacks pieces are hitting the board, maybe some board wipes are hitting to clear out the creatures. It's great. You're just
Oh, it feels so good after
yeah,
a
if
board
everybody
wipe.
else is just kind of trying to put things back together and you're just kind of soaking up this constant stream of cards, just vibing. Nah, that's great. That feels awesome.
I can't stand that you have to untap with these cards. Maybe it says something about my meta that I get my enchantments blown up all the time, but I cannot stand these. It feels like I never get my card
Dies
back.
to Farewell, not good.
Dies to Farewell, not good. For instance, in my Iara deck, which is to impact tremors, mono black impact tremors, so I have a bunch of token generators. I run the it was your favorite card of the year.
Oh yeah, the bat.
for last
Hell
year.
yeah.
The funny bat.
The bat with Offspring. That's just Dark Confidant. I run that card, and that card and Bitter Blossom are the only 2 upkeep effects I have in that deck. And I don't even think I should be running Bitter Blossom. I just like the card that much. So for me, those cards are the exception and not the rule. I think I don't know. I feel like decks get more clunky the more cards that you have to untap with before you're happy with them.
I think you have to like temper that, right? That's why I play a ton of these effects. Like I load up on them because you can't just yes, if you just play like 4 or 5 random has to untap, it's gonna feel weird and clunky. But in my more control-oriented decks, and I play in a lot of control decks, playing like 6 or 7 of these and filling the space in between that with board wipes, yeah, when I have Visions of Phyrexia and Outpost Siege in play, and then I go board wipe, oh, I'm feeling like a king because the next turn I'm drawing 3 cards and then I draw 3 more cards again, and since I just extended the game 3 more turns, I'm getting 2, 4, 6, 8 extra cards in the situation. And I do agree with you that in like the average deck, it is kind of awkward to have a lot of these cards that don't do anything because you're naturally going to have a lot of these, right? Soul Ring is a terrible top deck, right? You're naturally going to have a lot of these effects, so having a lot of them in a random mid-range deck is kind of awkward.
Yeah. This conversation's made me realize one thing. And it's like I am just like I want the One Ring to go away.
It's so lame. It's such a lame card. I feel like I have to mention it, otherwise I'm gonna like explode. I hate Arcane Denial. It's in 20% of decks. This card's so bad. It's so bad. Oh my god. So I'm doing a stats video. I'm tracking like the last 100 games of Commander I play. And I've been making note of when someone casts Arcane Denial, who they cast it on, and whether or not they win the game. I have yet to see a person cast Arcane Denial and win a game of Magic the Gathering in the last 70-something games I've played. It's only happened a couple times, like 4 or 5, right?
Yeah, it didn't happen in 70 games previously.
Yeah, no. It didn't happen in 70 games. But, like, it's... Oh, man. I want to do more stats with this. I'm going to eventually make, like, a... This is going to take forever to do, but I need to track way more stats with this card. It is such an abysmal defensive counterspell. It is only decent offensively, right? I attack for lethal, they Cyclonic Rift in response, and you go, here's my Arcane Denial. You lose, I draw a card. That's the best case scenario, and there's a lot of times where you don't want to do that.
So yeah, in a control deck, Arcane Denial, I agree, is pretty abysmal, because in a control deck, oftentimes as well, you're trying to run people out of resources, so giving them 2 resources for their 1 resource that they spent is actually down, even if it's tempo up.
It's so bad. I lost my mind when Tolarian Community College released their control video, and he was like, "Oh, Arcane Denial is extra good because of the card of it." I was like, "No, you missed the whole point of control. Why are you giving them cards?"
So here's the thing too. It's like, yes, okay, in a 4-player game of Magic, it kind of is card advantage, right? Because your opponent's going up 1, and your other 2 opponents are at 0. If your other 2 opponents are already at 0, like cards in hand, and you counter someone's spell, and they draw 2, that's a bad position as a control player.
It's really bad. It's a bad position as a player, right? Because then they have 2.
Yeah, so I agree. However, I like Arcane Denial in certain decks. So, of course, the go wide decks that you mentioned that, like, I have Merfolk deck, you're trying to board clear me, I counter it, I untap, and win. There's better options for this, but even still, it feels pretty nice in there, especially when it's 1 colorless and blue. That actually matters a lot. I find myself running Mana Leak quite frequently because it's not double blue. This being said, I also like it in combo decks. Even combo decks that take a slightly more controlling edge, that are just trying to stay alive long enough to combo. And actually, like, cantripping a counterspell is not that bad, especially when you don't care about how many cards your opponents have when you combo.
But in combo decks, you can play Remand, you can play Dispel. Like, combo decks play a different suite of cards, and most casual EDH decks are not comboed.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're also using counterspells more defensively. Again, yeah, it's fine as a defensive counterspell because it's low mana value, low color requirement. So if you're like, I'm a combo deck, I do this and win, I just need to protect that. Or you're the type of deck where you have 1 or 2 counterspells in your entire 99 and you only hold them for when you're winning the game, then, like, it's fine then.
The based way to use Arcane Denial is in Lier, Disciple of the Drowned, and you try to counter your own spell, and since spells can't be countered,
That's
you
funny.
just draw 3 for 2. Now we're talking.
You can do it in Brawl, it's 1 blue, counter your own spell, draw 3 and loot.
I don't know. Arcane Denial's fine. It's like, I think most. You're right that I think a control deck is typically not going to be wanting it, particularly, and I think particularly if you are countering the card of the player who is in the best position, then you're not going to be feeling all that great about things. But if you're countering,
Exactly, which is
that is common, yeah. But if you're countering, if you're countering something, maybe nobody's all that ahead, maybe you're countering something from somebody who isn't the leading player. In that case, I think the card advantage arguments about it are pretty valid. Like, yeah, it being able to.
yeah, but like if little Tippy's already losing, why are you countering his spells? Like this doesn't feel like a good use of counter magic, right?
That's you've mentioned this before. At Long River's Pole, it's blue for instant, gift a card, counter target creature spell if the gift was promised. Instead, you can counter any spell. So the thing with this is that it's blue, you counter spell, and then an opponent draws a card. The thing is, you choose the opponent. So you counter the person who's ahead, obviously, because they're snowballing and going ham and they're playing their Alpha Strike, right? Craterhoof Behemoth's coming down, bad example. Natural Order's coming down, and you need to counter it. You can Long River's Pole the Natural Order and give the weakest player a card draw.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've certainly started paying more and more attention to how often it is that there is a weakest player, and certainly sometimes there is. Certainly sometimes somebody kept a, dog shit hand, or their deck just isn't coming together for some other reason, and somebody's further behind. But there are a lot of other times where like two opponents are doing something scary, or three opponents are doing something scary, and it's something like in a case like that, like an Arcane Denial, it's easier on the mana than a Counterspell. Certainly I would rather play it than a Mana Leak. Like I don't even think.
Okay, yeah, Mana Leak's kind of doo-doo. I think Delay is the replacement.
Delay is probably the best counterspell for that specific mana cost. But let's
guys, listen. I have not had Mana Leak fail me.
I don't believe that.
Legitimately, Mana Leak has failed so hard. No, it's not. I'm tired of pretending that Mana Leak's a bad card. It's not bad. It's so
Delay
good.
is like 100 times better.
No. You don't understand. Have you ever countered like a turn 4 Panharmonicon? It feels
but what
so
about
good.
a turn 7 Panharmonicon?
Yes, I have. I've played like a gajillion counterspells. I've played like every
so
counterspell.
good. You need to believe me. Put a Mana Leak in your deck and tell me how often it's dead. It's not frequently.
Look, all I want to say, because I'm going to talk more about Arcane Denial years in the future when I have more stats. Everyone who's listening, if you don't think I'm right, I want you to write down every single time you see the card cast, every time you cast the card. Could you have paid blue, and who won? You're going to find that the person who gets to draw 2 extra cards happens to win a little bit more than you would think, considering their big spell got countered. And you're going to find that you had blue open more than you think. I think the blue versus 1 blue argument is like pretty bad.
I don't know. I still think the fact that you get a card definitely balances that to some extent. And in a game where there's not a clear arch enemy, I don't think it's meaningfully worse than like a Counterspell.
I want to see Logic Knot more often too. There's so many
cards.
That
card's good.
Logic Knot is just a second copy of Counterspell in most decks. It's Delve, counter target spell unless the controller pays X, and then it's X blue. In a lot of decks where you're like instant or sorcery slinging or self-milling to some extent, like even if you're just like casting a couple instants or sorceries, I feel like Logic Knot is often a second copy of Counterspell. If you don't care about your graveyard, that's the important caveat.
Wait, you don't like Logic Knot?
No, I'm running Arcane Denial over Logic Knot every day of the goddamn week. That card sucks.
Oh my! If you have 5 cards in your graveyard, it's basically a hard counter.
Maybe I play too many graveyard decks because I don't just want to. I don't want to excel that shit.
No. I need to. The caveat is you do not care about your graveyard. That is the caveat for Logic Knot.
It's a deck where you put a lot of cards in your graveyard, and also you don't care about your graveyard.
No. I don't think you need a lot of cards in your graveyard. Right? If a board wipe happens and you lose 3 creatures, you cast a mana spell earlier in the game. That's like
what?
No, then it's like 4 cards, right? 4 or 5 cards. Like you don't need.
I'll play a double blue for a Mana Leak.
5? You have 5 cards in your game.
This is not.
No. Logic Knot is better than Mana Leak. 3 mana is like on the cusp of like. They're probably going to pay for. I honestly think like 4, 5 mana. They're not paying 5 extra.
If I'm in a 3-color deck, I think I'm going to Mana Leak over Logic Knot.
Let's just do better color fixing. I don't know what this. Man, I play quad blue cards in my like four.
Don't you have like
color
$400 mana bases on all your decks? I built
Maybe.
budget decks.
Here's the thing: is I play. Here's the thing: is I just if I'm leaning one color, I just play all of the like even tapped duels. I play all the tapped duels that are that color, and then the other thing. People try to make their mana bases like an even spread of all the things, but you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
You can be like, I'm playing War of Invention in my 5-color mana base. I don't own every dual land. I don't even own every shock land, I don't think.
Are you really playing a 4-color deck if you can run like Cryptic Command in it? That sounds like a mono blue deck splashing like 3 other colors.
I mean, I'm just saying. I played 3 and 4 color, triple and quad pips in all sorts of 4 and 5 color duels for years. And I played like gained lands in those decks, dude. You just play all the blue gained lands, and then you're good. This is the same in my black decks that played like triple pip cards to make Necropotence work, even though I'm like in 3 or 4 colors. Like, yeah, just play all the
on a wall of tap lands.
Black dual lands. Yes. I'm so tap land pilled these days. I don't fuck with basics anymore.
A lot of them do have pretty good add-on bonuses or whatever.
Yeah, I just play like crappy tap lands or like MDFCs that have like goofy effects on one side and they're tap lands on the other. And then they're tap duels, but it's like fine. I have like more mid-range value than you.
Yeah, no, that's fair. There are some decks where tap lands really don't matter all that much.
All right, we're going to move on to Beseech the Mirror, where you beseech us for answers with your questions. I still don't know if I'm using the word beseech correctly. To ask us a question, you just need to have mirror in your comment. On Spotify, YouTube, you can also tweet at Elkarai or Blue Sky us, and we'll get to your questions on the podcast. The first question is from Psychedelic Swell. Mirror, I tap 2 untapped creatures and trade in my firstborn to ask, is it con, or con? And they've spelled it KAHN, CON, KAHAN, KAAN, KHAN, or CAWN? This is crazy.
Well, and the answer is very easy too. It's con.
Yeah, it's con.
Yeah, it's con, exactly.
Cool.
No, it's KAAN. There's 2 A's, no H. I'm Turkish. They spell it that way. Next question is from Rare Baby Steak 3419. Great username.
Awesome.
Their profile pic's pretty funny too. Mirror, I sack my neighbor's dog to scry 1. If you were going to build a Reanimator deck, what commander would you choose? Their personal favorite is the 8-mana Sauron.
So Reanimator deck, I feel like we need to be a little specific here about our terms, because if we're talking like Reanimator in terms of I'm bringing back huge creatures, or because we could also be talking about like,
let's say Reanimator as in bringing back huge creatures, not just general graveyard deck.
Okay, great. Because I was like Duretti, the new Duretti that's like a trash for treasure set, like Titan. So like on enter and attack, you get to trash for treasure. Oh, that card's so cool from Aether Drift. But if we're talking like creature specific, Teriel Soul Reckoner. This card,
yes,
I love it so much, and it's a matter of when rather than when I'm gonna build her. I really like this card because you can't get stuff from your own graveyard, so it's hingent based on what your opponents are doing, and my thought is you just Mardu control people. And then you have like targeted graveyard exile like Withered Wretch or Lion Sash, and you like spot remove all the bad targets, or you untap Teriel multiple times to just take the whole graveyard. Just like I'll take the lot, even the bulk, right? And then also you can like spot remove creature cards from opponents' graveyards until you have one with a really good ETB, and you can tap Teriel, bring that creature back into play under your control, sacrifice the creature, untap Teriel with an untapper like Patriarch Seal, or you have like a Drum Bellower or White Plume Adventurer, And for the turn cycle, you basically get to bully that one card in the graveyard, just throwing it in and out to get the ETB repeatedly. That play pattern has delighted me so much that I've really considered running Teriel as a commander.
Teriel's funny. I don't know. I have a Shroom deck, and I would have to say that. It's not a reanimator deck in the sense that it is trying to win as fast as possible with as large of creatures as possible, but a large part of the deck is reanimating large creatures, so I think that counts. And I just find...
I mean, you can use it as reanimate.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah, there's plenty of good Sphinxes.
For sure. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Shroom. I think the artifact typing, the colors, you get a lot from that.
I'm going to pick something that I think people assume is an artifact commander, but doesn't have to be. Feldon of the Third Path. This guy is awesome. It's red 1 for 2/3 human artificer. Pay 2 and a red, tap, create a token that's a copy of target creature in your graveyard, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types, gains haste, gets sacked at the next end step. I think a lot of people get hung up on he makes artifact copies of things, but the thing in the graveyard doesn't have to be an artifact. It can be anything. So in this deck, you just want to play like Faithless Looting and Cathartic Reunion and just ditch huge creatures, draw cards, and then your commander reanimates, makes hasty copies of them. And then you can do stuff like Sundial of the Infinite to keep them around forever. Or, if you want to throw some artifact synergies in there, you can use things like Goblin Welder because it turns that token into an artifact, and then you can sack that to reanimate a different artifact or whatever. Awesome with like a Worm Coil engine because you make a big scary Worm Coil, you swing, it gets sacked, and you get to keep the tokens. It's pretty awesome.
I think my favorite thing about Feldon is the flavor text. Now, a lot of people quote Feldon's flavor text. It is good flavor text, as like, ooh, this flavor text is so sad. She will come back to me, right? And he's holding like a construct's head, like trying to reanimate his wife, basically, as a construct. But the way this plays out in a commander game, like Ludo narratively, is that he's failing so hard to make his wife again that he brings out like a Balefire Dragon.
That's pretty good.
Which is
you don't know who his wife is.
True. We shouldn't assume.
His wife is Lauren of the Third Path.
That's Balefire Dragon. What are you talking about?
right, of course.
Cookie? Is this Cookie Monster, but spelled dyslexically? I don't know. Sorry, can't read your name. Mirror, I cast Rakdos Charm and exile my own graveyard to ask you this question. How much do you share about your deck when playing against new opponents? On one extreme, you could say nothing. On the other extreme, you could tell them what cards to look out for, how to disrupt your win con, etc., etc. What do you do and why?
It depends on the vibe of the table. If I know Con every single time goes like, do not tell me anything about your deck. I'm like, all right, go.
Yeah.
Most of the time though, if I feel like I am playing something that is incredibly like weird and people won't flag it as a problem right away, I will mention it. I do this the most for my Techathal Inquiry Dominus deck, which is a combo deck. It is a dedicated combo deck. And I will tell people basically some of the combos flat out because I don't want people to be caught off guard when I have like an Astral Cornucopia with 5 mana rocks and I like play, some like horrible like Manifold Key and I untap it and then I like Surge Node and I like move counters around and I like take infinite turns. Because the combos in my Techathal deck are like multi-piece where all the pieces don't look that threatening. I have to put them on the board first. And then if I untap with them, I win. So there's like chance for sorcery speed interaction there. And I don't want people to be like, oh, well, I had the answer to this combo, but I didn't answer it because I didn't realize a combo, like this could be part of a combo at all. So, yeah. Generally, that's when I will typically tell people what's going on with the deck.
I'm pretty similar, particularly when I'm playing with my Francisco Malcolm deck at my local game store. I will just be like, this is a time civ deck. I'm looking to win around turn 5 to 6. And I will update people on how I'm doing with that because, this is typically one of the stronger decks in the high power casual pods there. And I think that's appropriate. Now, with some of my weaker decks, I will sometimes give people less information, but I will still happily disclose information if people ask, and I will still typically give people kind of a rundown on what my deck is doing. And I think games are much better when people have an idea of what they're playing against and can kind of strategize against it and figure out what different cards mean for that deck.
I think that takes away the learning experience. I'm sorry, but I'm completely on the other side. So for me, if somebody tries to tell me about their deck, like if they're like, "Hey, my special combos," I will try to like interrupt them and tell them, "No, no, 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 don't tell me. Like, please don't tell me who your hidden commander is. Don't tell me the secret funny thing in your deck. Like, I want to see it play out in the game. You know, I don't want you to spoil the surprise of what cool thing you have done before the game starts. That's like it ruins the fun. That's like it's just somebody telling you what your birthday gift is gonna be like 9 months in advance. Like it just ruins the whole thing. Like if you came up with a cool, interesting deck, I want to see you put the thing together and do the thing. That sounds awesome. I would love to see it actually in game. Don't tell me in theory how cool your deck is. Show me.
Yeah, I definitely get some number of comments that fall along those lines. People being like, oh, I like the mystery of it. I play Commander for the mystery. I like to figure out what's going on. I like to, deduce. And that is not something I really feel like I can respond to just because I am just the absolute opposite of it. And I don't think there's any like convincing people. Like if that's what you enjoy about the Commander format, that's awesome. I don't. That's fine. I'm going to act as though other people share my opinions on this when I'm at tables, I guess, and that's kind of all you can do.
So if let's say we played a Commander game, us, and I brought a new deck, and I said, hey, I'm super excited about this deck, you would be like, hey, who's your hidden commander and what's the spiciest combo? You would actually actively want to look for that before we started?
Not necessarily. No, like I'm typically more disclosing about my own deck than I am expecting people to disclose their decks. Now, if they throw out some surprise combo, if some, random permanent in their deck happened to be way, way, way more important than it initially seemed like it was going to be, I'm going to be a little irritated. I'm going to feel a little bit like they intentionally tried to get one over on me. I'm going to feel like they're a bit of a poor sport. But if it's just them kind of having their fun little thing that they want to pull out a little later, I might not care so much.
Really?
Yeah, for me, I think we're like there's metas in other formats. There's not really like a commander meta, right? Like the meta is different from game store to game store, player to player. So when I'm up against Goblin Charbelcher in Modern, like I know what to do when my opponent like chords or like not chords, sorry, worse, different card. And I know the combo lines in Yawgmoth. I know when to exile the Young Wolf, right? Whereas in Commander, like I might not know that this random card that was printed in Commander 16 is a combo piece in your deck. I like, that's where I'm standing.
But this is part of the like skill of the game, is it not? Right? Going, okay, they played this card and like, it's a free sack outlet, even if it's not a one that I commonly see, but it is a free sack outlet. So now I need to think like, okay, it's a free sack outlet. Is that a combo piece? And I have to gauge and decide, do I hold up interaction here? Do I not hold up interaction here? And you make that like gamble on whether or not you do. That's like part of the game, right? That is
within the scope of a deck and a game. Yes, if I know the contents of my opponent's deck, I can figure out, okay, what do they have now? What are they doing here? Within the context of the Commander format, there are like 30,000 cards in this thing. Like, this is...
Yeah, it's the awesome part. That's
I
fucking hate... Why would
Sorry,
you
I
want
shouldn't say
to
the fucking word, but I hate that. I dislike that. I really, I don't have the goddamn brain power for this shit. Let me know what your deck is before the game so I can strategize and play. Maybe I'm just not big-brained enough to play with these people who want to, like...
Yeah, I mean, this is something I do entirely.
But then you learn, right?
Too, by the way.
You see this combo one time, and then you go, whoa, that's cool. I've never seen that before. I've never seen this interaction of cards before in my entire life, of these gajillion cards, all the games I've played, hundreds of hours pouring over this game. I've never found this puzzle, set of puzzle pieces together. And then the next time you play against them, right? Like you've improved as a player, right? You've gained more knowledge.
Yeah,
is there nothing to that?
I mean, this is something I do entirely prescriptively. I want to add, like, I don't like go like, oh, you didn't tell me about this combo piece, now I'm miffed. It's like I do this when I feel like my deck is gonna like get one over on players. I don't want that like unfair, horrible feeling, because I've had people go before like, oh man, I had the removal spell for that, but I didn't see the window or like whatever, right? And that's just like an awful like feeling. Like I could have been stopped in this. It like the interaction was there, but they just didn't fire it, right? Like, and that doesn't feel like a well-earned win to me, right?
So I agree, and to that point, none of my casual EDH decks have infinite combos.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's just like I don't know. I feel like casuals can have combos. Like I think it's totally
Exactly,
fine to
which I
run
think
them.
is it's like fine. Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
if you get me with one, that's
I
fine.
mean, I guess you mentioned kind of the kind of cool, unique thing. Um, I know I had a whole video about this last year of my process with the kind of the cool, unique synergy deck or the cool, unique combo deck where, if a deck does a super cool thing, then that can be like a really, mind blowing moment. But ultimately, like that's not the highlight of the game for most people. That's not, people can go, oh, that's kind of neat. But then if it's like a combo that ends the game, like, has that improved anybody's day? Has that kind of improved the experience? The fact that they'd never seen that before, the fact that they'd never suddenly lost that way before. Like, I don't know.
Well, the highlight of the game is when you remove the combo because you caught them, and that's why everyone should play way more removal because the removal is the highlight of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, what I quoted that video actually, Snail, in my Techathol deck tech, and for me, the thing that makes my Techathol deck interesting, like to play, is that all of the combos take place over multiple turns of setup. Like I need to like build my Doomsday Machine on the table where people can exile it or Vandal Blast it and explode me, right? And I do have counter spells, right, to counteract that. But if the whole table works together, like they're gonna answer me at sorcery speed, right? Which is I think a nice valve to have in terms of like how it can survive at a casual table.
Right, but all of that is in the power level discussion. So if we pivot back to the question, what I actually say about my decks is this is my mid power casual deck, and that is the end of the my rule zero conversation. And all of my decks are generally mid power casual decks. Like I am a firm believer that for the most part, if your deck plays reasonable amounts of removal, reasonable amounts of card draw, you can handle most pods. Like the power level bubble of like or the power level scale of where all decks are is like CDH is a mile away. There's real garbage like really far down, and most decks are kind of close enough that in a pod it works out. I'm not this like huge believer that there's like a ton of variance, in a 4 out of 10 can't fight a 5 out of 10 or whatever, right? Like these are all like really close. Um, so that's why I don't say anything. Now, before anybody in the comments says anything, if anybody's still listening at this point, um, I don't intentionally withhold information. If somebody says, "Hey, are there infinite combos in your deck?" I'm not going to be like, "Sucks to suck, Bucko." I'll say no because there's none, right? Or if they just ask me like, "Is there mass land destruction?" I'll answer the question. The answer is no. um, or if it's during the game, like in my Heliod deck, I play uh, Endless Horizons, which takes all the planes out of my deck, which is all the lands of the deck, and then I use Goblin Charbelcher to kill players. If I've done that and Goblin, Charbelcher is on the stack, I will explain to people how it works. I'm not going to be like, haha, you didn't know this. But, when it's on the stack, I'll be like, hey, this could blow you up. So I don't like withhold information, or if I'm like, hey, this is going to win me the game, this is going to do this big thing, I will let players know, especially if they're like new players. I don't want anyone blindsided by onboard things. But like I'm not gonna tell you who my secret commander is. I'm not gonna tell you what my theme is. I'm not gonna tell you what my favorite card of the deck is or like how you beat it. Like you're gonna have to figure that out on your
Yeah,
own.
for sure.
And I think that's better for new
Yeah, and
players.
God, am I playing EDH against the Sphinx? There's so many riddles going on.
yeah. I mean, I think as I said earlier, kind of, I've seen that sentiment in my comment section sometimes that EDH, that the mystery is fun, and I get that some people find that genuinely fun. I don't really understand it, and I I think that the sheer number of cards in the game, the sheer size of the format, the diversity, makes me strongly want any kind of simplification of the card pool that I can get, whether that be knowing the cards or having a general idea of what's in my opponent's decks, that sort of thing. But I get that some people can enjoy this, so I'm not trying to call anybody a bad person or trash on anybody's parade or nothing like that. I just find the
Yeah,
format
absolutely.
very complicated, and Especially if I haven't played Commander in a while, I tend to get pretty overwhelmed and start making mistakes if there's a ton of random stuff I haven't seen before, and I'm being expected to kind of cobble together all these different things in my brain in addition to playing my deck.
Yeah, luckily Magic has very good syntax, so like all cards are worded somewhat similarly. So like you can at least make inferences on what a card can and will do based on other cards you've seen before, just because of the wording and stuff.
Yeah. And for the veteran players, I do get kind of the appeal of, you can start to recognize putting together, sack outlet, card with this on the ETB, you can kind of start to piece together, what does a combo look like, what does a synergy engine look like, what does a removal engine look like, I think you can start to put together things like this, and I definitely I get the appeal of that to people, because that is certainly a skill you can build, and that kind of might genuinely, flex an interesting muscle for people.
Good lord, this is a long podcast.
It is.
I think it's gonna round out to about an hour eventually. After all the cuts and stuff, I think there's a lot of things that can be on the floor.
I find this topic super interesting. I made 2 whole videos that basically tie into this question, so I have no problems talking about this. This is super cool to me, and I think it's interesting.
I think this is a good podcast.
For sure.
It's just long,
for sure.
Which means we gotta end it. Yay! If you got this far in the podcast, type "I hate green" in the comments.
Type "I love green."
True. If you got this far, you get to hear me cussing, unless that gets bleeped.